and now we're just really getting into some of the final steps before Dragon makes it to the space station.
Yeah, and on your screen right now we're in orbital night, so the Earth is blocking the sun, but you can see the lights from the Dragon spacecraft. That flashes a light that's right along the forward hatch. Right now, Dragon is in a relative pointing mode that's pointed directly at the space station, and making its way towards waypoint 1, which is about 220 meters below the station. The International Space Station, when we're doing proximity operations, has a couple of imaginary gates. They're sort of three-dimensional shapes around the space station for vehicles that are approaching. Right now we're moving towards a hold just outside of the 200-meter keep-out sphere. And Bob and Doug aboard. Right now we're currently seated in their spacesuits, monitoring the transition, and when they get to waypoint 1, they'll issue a hold to conduct a manual flight test on this test flight mission.
Yeah, this will be their second manual flight test, and really the second kind of key objective for them to really put Dragon through the ringers. This is a demonstration flight. This is that final test before we certify the SpaceX Dragon to operationally carry full crew complements to the International Space Station. They were able to complete their first flight test shortly after getting on orbit. That one, they focused on changing Dragon's attitude, using the Earth as a guide to put Dragon in a very specific orientation known as local vertical, local horizon, essentially putting it in an orientation the same as a plane flying over the surface of the Earth. So the attitude control of Dragon, just one part of, or really one half of controlling the spacecraft. Now they're going to be testing out the translational maneuvers. So once they command that hold, the first thing that they'll do is align Dragon very precisely with the actual docking axis, and then they'll step through and send a number of commands to the spacecraft through those touch screens, moving it across a couple of different axes. So again, translational means you're moving left, right, forward, backwards, up, down, and that's one half of really controlling the spacecraft, is you have all of these different axes to worry about, both translational and for attitude. So they'll step through those. Depending on how those go, we'll then be able to move in for the final approach.
Yeah, that's right. One thing to consider with a spacecraft is it is a three-dimensional body that's moving in space. So you not only have to control your X, Y, Z position, that up, down, left, right, forward, back motion, but you also have to control which direction you're pointing. So we've alluded to the sim online that starts you off in a skewed attitude. Anytime you're pointed in a different direction, then do those translations, you have extra motions that you need to cancel out in space.
Yeah, I remember the simulation too can show you how deceiving it can be to fly in space, because when you initially look at it and you load up, it almost looks like you're already pointing directly at the docking port, and I just need to go straight, when in fact you need to physically move the capsule down and left and roll it so you're completely lined up, and then change which direction you're pointing. It's just infinitely more complex than just getting in your car and doing a left, doing a right, going forward, backward. You're operating in all dimensions when you're flying in microgravity in a spacecraft. So Dragon doing that autonomously right now. The crew will step in to do some manual control, just to again prove out the Dragon systems for the crew to jump in should they have to. Looks like we're getting some thunderstorms actually on the Earth below. Let's see where they're flying over. We're still over the Pacific Ocean. We just flew over the island of Fiji in this orbital nighttime, about 264 statute miles over a restless planet Earth.
Beautiful to see those views of the planet. Even more beautiful when we had orbital daytime. But we had some really cool shots. There's one point when we flew over the Caspian Sea, saw some really cool clouds there, and I think we also saw nighttime over Japan as we were flying over the Terminator.
Yeah, we're able to see a couple of city lights on the Earth's surface below. We're a little more than halfway through this orbital nighttime. We should be getting sunrise in about 15 minutes from now. And at that point, we will be just about arriving at waypoint 1. So we should be getting sunrise right as Dragon is arriving, just about 220 meters out in front of the space station.
Here's a cool view from the station camera. You can see Dragon approaching. We've just got those red and green lights on either side of the capsule. It gives folks looking at the capsule a sense of orientation of the vehicle. And here's a view from Dragon. Dragon's got a number of relative navigation sensors, as well as a couple of cameras that can look forward. That will hopefully get some additional views far as we get closer to docking. So here's a good view of the space station. Pretty cool. You can actually you can see the solar panels and actually the thermal radiators there. Here's a great view from a camera behind Bob and Doug. Bob in the right-hand seat and the pilot seat. Doug in the commander seat or the CDR seat. They've got a display in front of them. That's the forward view. It's got some procedural information on the left-hand side that's telling them criteria that they're looking for. Anything off nominal, they could, of course, step in and issue a command if necessary. And then on the left-hand and right-hand screen, we're actually their piloting controls. So when the vehicle is in an appropriate state to receive those commands, they can just hop in and use those touch-sensitive gloves, issue commands to the vehicle's attitude control system.
Have a little over 13 and a half minutes still in this maneuver. It is really cool to get this look inside. And again, that screen in the middle, you can see the trajectory that Dragon is on. And if they were to just continue, it would eventually take them on a path away from the International Space Station. But at the very top of really their orbital path right now, they'll converge on a point just 220 meters directly in front of the space station. So once they do get to that point, they'll be able to command a hold and have the vehicle essentially hover just a few hundred meters in front of the space station itself. They're moving at a pretty slow pace right now, but again, slow and steady wins the race whenever we're doing these docking maneuvers in close proximity to the station. We have about 13 minutes to go. They're moving at less than half a tenth of a meter per second as they continue to close in.
There's another view from the space station looking back, and there's a brief moment there when we were looking at Doug's display where you could see that same view that we had of the International Space Station. So they have those views from the vehicle overlaid on their displays to give them some awareness of their relative motion to the space station, especially handy if they had to actually step in for manual piloting to dock. Fingers crossed they won't have to do that today, though, and that the flight control system will operate as intended.
Yeah, we'll get the manual piloting demo, and then it'll be handed over to Dragon to do a nice, smooth operated, automated docking. Again, we've not been tracking any issues with the Dragon spacecraft on the whole flight uphill. Been moving through each of these burns a little bit ahead of schedule, running about 16 minutes or so ahead of the timeline as it was originally mapped out.
Yeah, very, very healthy vehicle, this test flight, very little. I'm sure Bob and Doug have a few things as well that they're getting used to. There's only so much a simulator can train you on. I think they had mentioned a little bit of that during the ascent portion. There are a few things that are a little different than what they expected. But just because when you're actually launching on a rocket, that's a different feeling than sitting in a training capsule.
Yeah, can't quite simulate a 9-minute ride on top of a controlled explosion in an office. But as they did give credit to the teams here at SpaceX, the actual piloting of the spacecraft went off exactly like their simulators. And so they're able to do all of that training here in Hawthorne, both in a cockpit simulator and in a full mock-up of the Dragon spacecraft itself, even able to get fully suited, plugged into the seats, go through all of the different systems that they had to get familiar with before they moved into their flight today.
Yeah, you and Jesse actually had a really cool opportunity to step in and see the training capsule. The team that I work on actually gets to help train the astronauts that are coming through, so I've had some cool opportunities to interface with the Crew 1 crew. They've already started their training for the Dragon vehicle.
Yeah, you get the really cool job. I get to come tag along every once in a while. But yeah, it was really exciting to literally sit in the seat where Bob and Doug were as they prepared for this mission. It was really exciting.
Station, it's Houston on the big loop for Chris, crew monitoring. Copy that. Chris, you can begin to monitor the approach per step 1 of 1.104 Crew Dragon approach and retreat monitoring. Copy and work.
So heard some cool stuff over the loops there. Looks like Chris Cassidy aboard the station is getting ready to monitor. We'd sort of talked about this earlier, but during the Demonstration 1 mission, the crew aboard the International Space Station had issued commands to Dragon. That's a capability that they have. So
Yeah, so with Chris Cassidy now monitoring, we're a little under 9 minutes away from that arrival at waypoint 1. Let's jump over to Gary real quick for a quick station update, and he can walk us through some of the systems that are going to be in play during this manual piloting test. Gary?
Thanks, Dan. Yes, we're monitoring the approach of Bob and Doug. Now just about 300 meters from station, heading towards that waypoint 1. One of the next milestones here coming up is going to be the manual flight test. Chris Cassidy already getting in position in front of the RPOP. This is the rendezvous software that he'll be using to watch some of the demonstration and the rest of the docking procedures for Bob and Doug as they move in to dock with the International Space Station. Right at about the time of the manual flight test, they will be communicating through the C2V2, Common Communication for Visiting Vehicle. You heard the call on the big loop. That was Joshua Kutrick here in Mission Control Houston, Capcom, talking with International Space Station Commander Chris Cassidy all over the big loop. That's an integrated communication loop with space to ground on station, Dragon to ground on